Originally, it was decided that no one would introduce these two distinguished and loved men. They, after all, being the heart of the evening, could introduce each other. Then 3 days ago, I called up Bill Alfred about having dinner Friday, and he said, "Grand, Jonathan Griffin will be here. He's arriving from London." "Oh, dear Jonathan," I said, ever the dispassionate exponent of ballet, and my brain went clickety-click the way it might if you suddenly saw you had a full house in poker. "Great, he can introduce you and Robert Lowell on Sunday." We met that Friday, and I didn't ask, I just said, "And you will help all these little dunces and introduce Bill and Cal." He loves Bill and Cal, and he said yes. So here I am introducing the introducer. Translator, and I mention only two of the many notable Frenchmen he has translated, Monterland and Charles de Gaulle, author of a beautiful book of poetry entitled The Rebirth of Pride, also a collaborator with Christopher Fry for the scenario of the film The Bible. It is fitting that he should stand on this stage tonight for his play The Hidden King, which was later performed at the Edinburgh Festival, had its premiere performance here in Sanders Theatre. I introduce to you, dear friend, distinguished writer and poet, just in from London via Detroit, Mr. Jonathan Griffin.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think it was W.H. Auden who said, "A professor is a man who talks in another person's sleep." Well, we're going to listen tonight to two men who've proved that a professor can be a man who wakes you up with poetry. When Mrs. Brooks asked me to introduce them, I was just bewildered by the honor she was doing me. I couldn't really believe that she wanted me to introduce two men who are so well known, so well loved, and so greatly and rightly admired, both here and far afield. Because I'm really a very insignificant person. As a poet, I was a late starter. After I'd resigned from the British diplomatic service in order to write seriously, I just disappeared and worked until The Hidden King was finished. And then, before The Hidden King was even published, I had a letter from Harvard, from Professor MacLeish, and he invited me to come here for a conference on poetic drama, at which there was to be a reading of parts of The Hidden King here in this hall by members of the Poets' Theatre. And when I came, I soon found something, and that was that Mr. Lowell and Mr. Alfred are men who, besides doing their creative work, are incredibly generous with their time and energy in encouraging and criticizing new poets, both young ones and this late starter. I owe more to them than I can say, and probably more even than I'm aware of. It's wonderful to have this chance of saying thank you to them in public. Tonight you're going to hear some of their latest work. A few weeks ago, I ran into Mr. Sidney Nolan, the painter, who's a friend of Mr. Lowell's and of mine, and he was very excited He'd seen Mr. Lowell, who'd been doing a lot of writing, and had produced a new work of, Mr. Nolan said, about 50 sonnets, but I gather it's more like 100, and that they were wonderful and probably the best thing he's done, said Sidney Nolan. And that, I thought, that really is saying something. If you love and admire Mr. Lowell's published work as much as I do. Ever since Hogan's Goat was a work in progress, my wife and I have been absolutely mad on it. He read us bits of it, I remember, at our house in London at that early stage. And the promise that was revealed then was more than fulfilled by the finished work. And then, as you all know, it had a tremendous success on the stage in New York. And now it's come to Boston, to the Theatre Company of Boston, who are a bit later going to do, I believe, the Phaedra of Mr. Lowell. So there, poetry by Robert Lowell and parts of a new play by William Alfred. I can't wait to hear them, and I'm not going to keep you waiting any longer.
Halfway through the introduction, I noticed Jonathan Griffin didn't have this, which makes, I guess this works, but I'm going to be doubly safe. But wait, now, I do know how to do this, but I don't know how to do it quickly. Is this sort of right? Yeah. Three people on the stage have a good deal in common, perhaps too much, and we all write poems and plays, and we're all up here. And I met Jonathan Griffin in this very spot, I think, about a century ago. William Alfred's one of my oldest friends, and we parallel even more closely, I think, that we not only both write poems and plays, but we're both Harvard professors of English. Now, when you put those three things together, it might seem that art couldn't arise from their conjunction. But we've survived. We wear it lightly. I have some brilliant notes here I can't read. I'll say something about ballet school. Well, I have marvelous ideas of how ballet, this is for the Cambridge Ballet School for fellowships, and my old friend Esther Brooks. Ballet and poetry resemble each other in some way. They're both arts. We'd like to say both our arts not only entertain but instruct. We're entertaining but not entertainers. I'm going to read 3 or 4 poems from a book of mine called The Union Dead, and then a group of poems that are unpublished. Let's see. sort of thrown into consternation that I didn't bring the book, one of the books I intended. I've had many books published, but I've never been collected. That makes it very difficult to read. You always don't have one of them, and it's the one you want. But this will do. This seems sort of good. It's very out of date now. It's called July in Washington. It was written in the, I think, General Eisenhower times. Or Kennedy. It's long ago. And the plot of the poem, it's a very short poem, is this, that, what I'm emphasizing about Washington is the heat and the tropical vegetation, the circles that Washington is built on, and the picture of these circles spreading all over the earth. Yeah, well, I think this still bears. July in Washington. The stiff spokes of this wheel touch the sore spots of the earth. On the Potomac, swan-white power launches keep breasting the sulphurous wave. Otters slide and dive and slick back their hair. Raccoons clean their meat in the creek. On the circles, green statues ride like South American liberators above the breeding vegetation. Prongs and spearheads of some equatorial backland that will inherit the globe. The elect, the elected, they come here bright as dimes and die disheveled and soft. We cannot name their names or number their dates, circle on circle like rings on a tree. But we wish the river had another shore, some further range of delectable mountains, distant hills powdered blue as a girl's eyelid. It seems the least little shove would land us there, that only the slightest repugnance of our bodies we no longer control could drag us back. I like to have things in places, and the places I know really are here and New York and Maine and Washington and wherever I happen to visit. This one's Maine. And it's really a poem about old age. It's called Soft Wood, which could stand for the floors and sides of a house, and for all of us as we get on, or at any time in our lives, we're soft wood. But it's particularly about old age, and it's more particularly about my cousin Harriet Winslow, who's now dead, but she owned the house I live in Maine, and she had a stroke 10 years before she died and couldn't move, though all her mind was fine. I mean, there was no injury there, but she couldn't move, and it was a wretched life. And it's really a poem from Maine to her in Washington when she was still alive. I think there's nothing to explain in this. Oh, yes, there is, but not to a Harvard audience. That the Scholar Gypsy is a great poem by Matthew Arnold, who read here. I think he's the first man who read here and the first person who couldn't be heard. And I don't think he read the Scholar Gypsy, he lectured, but Most of you know this story. The scholar Gypsy was an Oxford scholar in the, I think, the 13th or 14th century. And tired of Oxford, he went off with the Gypsies and had such a carefree life he never died, or at least he disappeared. And if we could do that, we'd, you see. But there's a proof that this doesn't work. If you ever watch a seal in the zoo, it has the perfect life without care, bending to the sun and the wind, and it doesn't live very long. But that's the image. It isn't meant to be funny, actually. Soft wood. Sometimes I have supposed seals must live as long as the scholar Gypsy. Even in their barred pond at the zoo, they are happy, and no sunflower turns more delicately to the sun without a wincing of the will. Here, too, in Maine, things bend to the wind forever. After 2 years away, one must get used to the painted softwood staying bright and clean, to the air blasting an all-white wall whiter as it blows through curtain and screen, touched with salt and evergreen. The green juniper berry spills crystal clear gin, and even the hot water in the bathtub is more than water, enriched with the scouring effervescence of something healing, the illimitable salt. Things last, but sometimes for days here, only children seem fit to handle children. And there is no utility or inspiration in the wind smashing without direction. The fresh paint on the captain's houses hides softer wood. Their square riggers used to whiten the four corners of the globe. But it is no consolation to know the possessors seldom outlast the possessions, once warped and mothered by their touch. Shed skin will never fit another wearer. Yet the seal pack will bark past my window, summer after summer. This is the season when our friends may and will die daily. Surely the lives of the old are briefer than the young. Harriet Winslow, who owned this house, was more to me than my mother. I think of you far off in Washington, breathing in the heat wave and air conditioning, knowing each drug that numbs alerts another nerve to pain. I'll read one I don't think I've read, but it's about a classmate of mine in school named Alfred Clark, and he was almost the brightest boy in the form, but he seemed a little cool and diffident, and you wondered what would happen to him. And then I didn't hear from him for years, though I might have, and when I did, it was his death notice, and there was a picture of him in the New York Times, and a rather delicate face had changed to a very swollen one, and he'd married for the 6th time, and he'd just bought his wife a $95,000 ring. And he drank. But it's, it's a sad story that Alfred Clark. The U is him, it's addressed to him. He was sort of a good friend. You read the New York Times every day at recess. But in its dry obituary, a list of your wives, nothing is news, except the $95,000 engagement ring you gave the sixth. Poor rich boy. You were unseasonably adult at taking your time and died at 45. Poor Al Clark. Behind your enlarged, hardly recognizable photograph, I feel the pain. You were alive. You are dead. You wore bow ties and dark blue coats and sucked wintergreen or cinnamon lifesavers to sweeten your breath. There must be something. Someone to praise your triumphant diffidence, your refusal of exertion, the intelligence that pulsed in the sensitive, pale concavities of your forehead. You never worked and were third in the form. I owe you something. I was befogged, and you were too bored, quick and cool to laugh. You were dear to me, Alfred. Our reluctant souls united in our unconventional, illegal games of chess on the St. Mark's quadrangle. You usually won, motionless as a lizard in the sun. I'll read 6 of these short poems, and no, that'll be it. This is the new work Jonathan Griffin spoke about, and I don't think they're sonnets, though I might be a little bit hard to prove they're not. They have no rhymes, and the scanson's irregular, and they're not meant to feel like sonnets. There's a way sonnets feel that if you write a real sonnet, you try to escape. But it's a good deal easier if you don't have rhymes and various things. And so it's not quite the same, but obviously there's some similarity. And there are a great number of these poems, and some of them connect very closely to the ones next to them, and others don't. And they're arranged in sequences. And the poem would be called Notebook of a Year, so that its structure is mostly going from one spring to another spring, and not a calendar poem. It's the sort of, you might put anything in a notebook, but you're aware of the year going by. Now, these are less personal than most of them, I think, but more political. That they're about they're grouped around 3 things, the 6 poems. The death of Che Guevara, the Pentagon March, and a trip I made, I think, for the State Department under some other form to Venezuela. And all these things come into the poems. Che Guevara's death. This is maybe one of the more difficult ones. I begin with Guevara's death, then there's a scene of the speaker in the Central Park in New York with a girl, and then the last 2 lines try to join this together with the image of a king, someone like Charles II hiding in a tree to prevent being killed. Someone who's both the killer and a victim, like Guevara. Che Guevara's death. Week of Che Guevara, hunted, hurt, held prisoner one lost day. then gangstered down for gold, for justice. Violence cracked up on violence, rock split on rock. The corpse of the last armed prophet laid out on a sink in a stable, displayed by flashlight. And the leaves lit up, still green, that afternoon, and burned to baldness as the oaks, lop branched to go on living, swelled with goiters like the fruit tree. And the heights of the uniform stone buildings overawed the poor, unleashed on this new world. Here, too, this park bench, where our clasped, illicit hands pulsed and stopped the blood stream as if it hit rock. Rest for the outlaw. Kings once hid in oaks with prices on their heads and watched for game. That armed prophet, you probably know, is a reference to Machiavelli, who said unarmed prophets were always killed. Well, armed ones weren't. He was distinguishing between Christ and Moses, but also any number of Renaissance people. Now, the second one's called Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, and it ought to be a perfect place. I mean, Venezuela should, and I know nothing much about it except the capital, but the living standard is higher than elsewhere in South America. It has a modern capital, built very much like ours, and all kinds of things that are on paper very good are practiced there. But actually, it's a very hideous, hard-hearted place that, the poem I give is really not a polemic at all. It's a description of going to the president's house, and a very uncomfortable place. And there you stood drinking champagne, and a mob of people, with about 3 women to about 100 men, and people with submachine guns, sort of mingling with the party, holding on to their guns. No. Caracas. Through another of our cities without a center, as hideous as Los Angeles, and with as many cars per head, and past the 20-foot neon sign for copper tone on a church, past the population earning $700 per capita in their brand new skyscraper living slabs, and on to the White House of El Presidente Leone, his small men with 18-inch repeating pistols firing 45 bullets a minute, the 2 armed guards petrified beside us while we drank champagne, and someone asking the president, "Where are the girls?" And the enclosed leader, quite a fellow, saying, "I don't know where yours are, but I know where to find mine." This house, this democracy, as we call it, built on foundations not of rock, but blood as hard as rock. And these 2 are about the Pentagon March, and the first is the morning, which was an absolutely beautiful day, and we all assembled between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, and it could hardly be a more beautiful autumn day. And then we got what seemed like 10 days of speeches, and you're almost dead, and then we marched in great confusion, and that's the first, until you met the MPs and the marshals, and then you suddenly experience something that most of us hadn't experienced before, facing people who might do anything to you if they're ordered to. And the second is a little group of us at the end, all rather elderly people, bourgeois people, and we were sort of sitting there and near the Pentagon, and the soldiers were told to advance on us, and then they were told not to brush up against anybody, and they made what I thought was a rather brilliant military maneuver, and they got through these people, not very dignified, having to go in single file through them. Then they were ordered to walk through us, on us, and then we left. Many of us, some didn't, and well, this is an account of that. The march. It's dedicated to my friend Dwight MacDonald, who helped me get to my feet at the end. Under the two white marmoreal Lincoln Memorial, the two tall marmoreal Washington obelisk, gazing into the two long reflecting pools, the reddish trees, the withering autumn sky, the remorseless, amplified harangues for peace. Lovely to lock arms, to march absurdly locked, unlocking to keep my wet glasses from slipping, to see the cigarette match quaking in my fingers, then to step off like Green Union Army recruits for the first bull run, sped by photographers, the notables, the whores. Fear, glory, chaos, rout. Our green army staggered out on the miles long green fields, met by the other army, the Martian, the ape, the hero, his newfangled rifle, his green new steel helmet. And the second. This is late in the day. Where 2 or 3 were heaped together, or 50, mostly white-haired or bald or women, sadly unfit to follow their dream, I sat in the sunset shade of their Bastille, their Pentagon, nursing leg and arch cramps, my cowardly, foolhardy heart, and heard, alas, more speeches, though the words took heart now to show how weak we were and right. An MP sergeant kept repeating, march slowly through them, don't even brush anyone sitting down. They tiptoed through us in single file, and then their second wave trampled us flat and back. Health to those who held, health to the green steel head, to the kind hands that helped me stagger to my feet and flee. One last poem now. I connect this, there's something intervening, but this is a poem about a cousin of mine, Charles Russell Lowell, who was cavalry colonel killed in the end of the Civil War. It seems appropriate in this building to read this. He had a very brilliant career that he had 13 horses shot under him. He served on the staffs of various generals, important generals, and wrote well about them. And very promising young man. He knew Emerson and other intellectual people. And when he graduated from Harvard, had TB and went to Algeria, I think, and rode and more or less cured himself. Then he went in the cavalry when the war began. When he was killed, he was serving under Sheridan, and a famous general who he described as the only capable one he'd served under, that he was more like a businessman than a general, or he worked as hard as a businessman would work for his business, unlike the way a general would work as a general. And he was hit early in the day at Cedar Creek in Virginia and thought of lay under a tree, and then he had himself tied to his horse and he was killed. Of course, he looks, you see, his portraits of him seem very strange to us for a long time, but now he looks quite a lot like a number of students that one has. He was 29 when he died. Hard to exhume him from the other Union martyrs, though common now, his long, short, crisping hair, the green mustache, the manly, foppish coat. More and more often he turns up as a student. 12 horses killed under him. A Boston nabob bred, then shipped their replacements. He gave everything at Cedar Creek. His men dismounted, firing, repeating, carbines heading to vicious charges, the slug collapsing his bad tubercular lung. The fainting, the bleeding, loss of voice above a whisper. Philip Sheridan, any field commander since Joshua shouting, "I'll sleep in the enemy camp tonight or hell." Charles had himself strapped to the saddle, bound to death, his cavalry that scorned the earth it trod on. Thank you very much.
It is a superstition of the theatre that you must never read or say aloud the last line of a play during a rehearsal or early readings of a play. I thought, as superstitious as I am, that I would begin perhaps with the last scene and then read the first scene in order to keep the curse off things. And since the play is called The Curse of an Aching Heart, you can see why I'm a little nervous about it. What I decided to do was to go through it, since there is much in my mind that is undecided about it, and read you enough of it to give you a sense of how it is laid out and how it will end. And let the light of chance bleed through it in a way in which the light of chance bleeds through all plays that you write and produce. God help me when I try to get a cast that will be able to talk tough New York. I don't know whether you know it, that the theater really, when I was a kid, was in tune to this kind of a play. Because the theater was an alternative to sports for uneducated people. That is, it was a way of finding your way into some kind of dignity in society without having to go through the boredom of the schools, including all schools. Now, it's very, very difficult to get anybody who talks as they were born. And remember that wonderful story about Josephine Baker going to George S. Kaufman's and saying to the Harlem maid, "I would like a demi-tasse de café noir," she said to the Harlem maid. And the Harlem maid fixed her with her eyes and said, "You talk out of your mouth the way you was born." Well, They are talking out of their mouth the way they were born, but they're not born in the run-down neighborhoods anymore, so it's a little tough. The action of this play takes place in 1922 in Brooklyn, and it is second and third generation Irish, German, and American Italians. Now, excuse me, the other way around. I was at a conference where somebody ate the face off me because I used that phrase wrong, so that I have Freudian reactions to using quotations. I mean, hyphens with anybody's name. The end. The thing about the play is I don't want to explain. I read a little bit of it in Chicago, and somebody sidled up to me and said to me, "Aren't you opting out?" And believe me, I'm not. I think you'll be able to see that it is about the stages of adjustment between private freedom and public freedom. It's moving from one stage of freedom in life to another, and so that, I mean, you can take it seriously, even though it isn't a serious play. I hope you'll be able to take it seriously. The first scene is on a streetcar, which I hope the very talented painters, sculptors, they do everything, Red and Mimi Grooms will do for me. And it will be a curtain that drops, and you'll see people on a bench. It's an open streetcar of the 20s and early 30s. They disappeared from Brooklyn in the early 30s, although they may have stayed in other cities later. And it's an open streetcar with a bench. It's a particular kind that maybe they didn't have up here, with a bench that ran all the way around. And you get the two girls who get on the streetcar with other people on it. One man reading a newspaper like that, and other people scattered down. And they're on their way to work, and it's a week in June in 1922. Their names, I'll give you the names of the various people in the play and lay it out for you. The heroine is Fran Duffy, a typist, and Lulu Fitter, excuse me, I got it wrong. Fran Duffy, a telephone operator, Lulu Fitter, a typist, Pasquale Pacchi Maladino, you see he's trying to pass for Irish, a streetcar conductor, Aloysius Wishy Burke, Wishy is short for Aloysius, Wishy Burke, he's a clerk in Thomas Ralston's, which would be the equivalent of a kind of a 10th-rate First National store. Martin Luggs Tobin is a runner in Wall Street who has aspirations to be a broker. J. Stanislaus McGahey is a construction executive and an Irish snob, as you can tell from the name. William T. Gluck, or Cousin Willie, is Fran's cousin, and Joseph P. Gluck, Uncle Jojo, is Fran Duffy's uncle. First you meet Fran and Lulu on the streetcar, and it's the open streetcar, and as they get on the streetcar, there are other people sitting on the bench alongside. Fran says, "Thank God it's Friday." Lulu says, "Ah, Fran, be a sport." Fran says, "I can't, I tell you, Lulu, I got this date." Then she stops, and she says, "Lack, Menafish, the fiend Thoreau's." The streetcar conductor, Packy, has heard them, and he says to the man who's reading the newspaper, "Hear that?" Before I begin, I ought to apologize. The language here is not my language. It is the language of the people in the play. Packy, hear that? Lack Menafish, the fiend Thoreau's. That means, Guiley, clam up. The guy is listening. These girls that work in Wall Street offices, they got this language, which they call it Gaelic, because you see it's only spoke by girls. Lulu says, "Who with, Fran? With one of them three cunyas?" Packy says to the man reading the newspaper, "Cunya, you should pardon the expression. Cunya means shit. She put it in the plurial." Fran, who is in love with, he's in love with Fran, and he keeps eyeing Fran Duffy. Fran says, "The fiend, Thoreau's," that is, and then Packy just interprets it to the man reading the newspaper. The guy is listening. I ought to pause here and tell you that this will have it may have an effect here on some members of the House, But this is a private language spoken in New York by girls who work in offices. So I'm being a bit of a fink. The fiend arose, Packy, the guy is listening. Lulu, the fiend can missile himself, the Gamionic. Fran says, Lulu, fitter. Packy says to the man who's reading the newspaper, putting it the nice way, the guy can screw himself. The word ain't screw, the mouth on that one. The man lifts the newspaper down, and of course, as you would expect, it's a priest. He says, young man, do you mind? You're standing on my shoe. Packy says, oh, excuse me, Father. Fares, please, fares. And then it goes down and up the line, you see. And Lulu continues the conversation. Who is this time? Lugs Tobin, Wishy Burke, or J. McGahey? With Flotsam, Jetsam, or with Flannel Mouth? Fran, J. Stanislaus McGahey. Lulu, pardon me. I went and used his name before he married. Fran, who married? Lulu, wasn't you the maid of honor when he got married to himself? Packy moving in toward them. Fares, please.